I'm Matthew Lapp, host of Matthew Lapp Train Guide. Also today I'm at the Smithsonian Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. The Smithsonian Museum of American History is located on 1300 Constitution Avenue Northwest in Washington, D.C. and is open 10 to 5:30 7 days a week. Just located west of the museum is the Washington Monument, the World War II Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial, the Reflection Memorial, and the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. Just south of this location, there is the Thomas Jefferson Memorial, which are famous landmarks to the national capital of the country. And also, north of here is the White House, where the President of the USA lives. The museum was established in 1957 and the building was under construction for quite some time. The Smithsonian Museum of American History opened in the year 1964, but during that time it was just known as the Museum of History and Technology. It was one of the last structures designed by the renowned architectural firm McKim, Mead and White. In 1980, the museum was renamed the National Museum of American History to represent its mission of the collection, care, study, and interpretation of objects that reflect the experience of American people. Also, inside, it even includes several train exhibits, as well as it includes the oldest steam engine in the USA, the John Bull, which was built in the UK in 1831, and a lot more. Also around the area, this is known as the Smithsonian Institute, and it has several other museums on site, including the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, a lot more. Also around the area, the film Night at the Museum 2, Battle of the Smithsonian, was filmed around the area as well. What you see right behind me is Camden and Amboy 1. Camden and Amboy 1 was built by the Robert Stephenson and Company in the United Kingdom in Newcastle, England in 1831, and is the 25th steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 420 Jervis type steam locomotive. Also, the locomotive is named John Bull. This locomotive is the original John Bull locomotive. After being built, it was shipped from the United Kingdom to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in parts. It became too tough to assemble the locomotive until an engineer named Isaac Drips figured out how to do so. The locomotive was originally used for the Camden and Amboy Railroad and originally was named Stevens, and it was named after the builder Robert Stevens. As the railroad was still under construction, the locomotive was placed into storage while the horse-drawn cars served the construction efforts until 1833. Through regular use of the engine, crews began calling it the Old John Bull in the mid-1830s, a reference to the cartoon personification of England, John Bull. Eventually, the informal name was shortened to John Bull, and this name was so much more widely used that Stevens fell out of use. The locomotive ran between Philadelphia, Pennsylvania and New York City, New York. In 1866, it was put into retirement. In 1871, it was leased to the Pennsylvania Railroad and it was numbered 601. Then, in 1872, it was consolidated to the United New Jersey Railroad and Canal Company in Camden, New Jersey. Then, that same month, it was leased to the Pennsylvania Railroad and had the same number again. Then, in 1883, the Pennsylvania Railroad went to the Smithsonian to find a place to keep the locomotive when it wasn't running, and there they met J. Watkins, who worked for the Camden and Amboy until an accident occurred. It cost him his leg. The railroad employed him as a caretaker to the locomotive and let the Smithsonian display it. The locomotive's first public exhibition at the Smithsonian Institute occurred in 1884, and it was displayed in the East Hall of the Arts and Industries Building. The railroad displayed it at several public exhibitions, which included the 1893 Columbian World's Fair in Chicago, Illinois, and 1896 Centennial Celebration. In 1910, the locomotive's tender was deteriorated beyond repair and was dismantled. In 1927, the Pennsylvania Railroad wanted to operate the locomotive again at the Baltimore and Ohio's Fair of the Iron Horse, and the locomotive was sent to the railroad shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and there it had a new tender built and was restored to operating condition itself. Afterwards, it went back to the Smithsonian where it remained on static display. In 1930, the railroad ordered a replica of this locomotive, which was built by the shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania, after the Smithsonian told the Pennsylvania Railroad of their wish to keep the locomotive under more cautious preservation. The replica ran multiple excursions in that time. In 1981, the museum brought it out for an operation to some nearby train tracks for its 150th birthday as it ran along the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal along the Potomac River within Washington, D.C. And that time, the locomotive was the oldest operational locomotive in the world. Then it was put back into retirement and was then carefully placed inside the museum building. Also, it stands on a section of the first bridge in the country that was made entirely out of iron, and it was designed by Richard B. Osborne, and it was built by the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad in 1845, and coal trains would travel over a creek emptying into the Schuylkill River near West Manayunk, just northwest of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania as well. Also, this locomotive is the oldest steam locomotive in the USA, and it can be found here at the Smithsonian Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., where it is today. And also, if you're looking for the engine, you can see it is next to the escalators by the entryways to the America on the Move gallery as well. What you see right behind me is Santa Cruz Railroad 3. Santa Cruz Railroad 3 was built by Baldwin in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1876 and is the 3972nd steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 440 American type steam locomotive. Also, the locomotive is named Jupiter. This locomotive was originally used for the Santa Cruz Railroad in Santa Cruz, California, and was used to transport freight and passengers from the town of Santa Cruz, California, to connect with the Southern Pacific Railroad in Watsonville, California. The name Jupiter was a common practice for American railroads of the 19th century to name their engines after Jupiter, king of gods, and other mythological figures to attract attention. Thus, the engine wouldn't be confused with the engine of the Central Pacific Railroad that pulled the ceremonial train to the driving of the Golden Spike in Promontory, Utah in 1869. Also, in 1883, the locomotive was retired from service on the Santa Cruz Railroad, and the railroad was purchased by the Southern Pacific Railroad, and the Santa Cruz Railroad roadbed line to standard gauge, and converting the engines to wider gauge would be costly and uneconomical, and the railroad elected to sell off the inherited engines and used its own standard gauge engines instead. This locomotive was sold to the Guatemala Central Railway, who dropped the engine's name, but it kept the number. In 1904, the Jersey City, New Jersey based United Fruit Company consolidated the Guatemala Central as the Guatemala Northern, and then the Guatemala Western and Ocos Railway into the Guatemala Railway, and it was renumbered 61. In 1912, the Guatemala Railway and Salvador Central Railway were consolidated into the International Railways of Central America, and the locomotive was renumbered 84. In 1928, it continued to haul fruit as well as a small number of passengers along the railroad's branch lines in the northwestern part of the country until 1960, when it was retired from working in Guatemala. It was then purchased by O'Roy Chalk, who was a New York entrepreneur and DC transit operator, in 1964. Also, for an unknown reason, he wanted the locomotive to be displayed as part of a children's park he was developing in Washington, D.C., and the locomotive was shipped to be displayed. The locomotive drew attention to the curator of the Smithsonian Institute, who had taken particular notice of the engine's year built. John H. White Jr., who was the curator that time, convinced Chalk to donate the engine to the Smithsonian as part of their upcoming bicentennial exhibition of 1976, and it was carefully restored that time. The engine was cosmetically restored to its as-delivered appearance and placed on display in the Smithsonian's Art and Industries building in 1976 for the exhibit, which was a recreation of the displays of the Centennial Exposition of 1876. The engine was displayed in the building until 1999, when it was relocated to the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. It was initially placed beside Southern Railway Steam Engine 1401. The engine was relocated again in 2004, though it remained within the museum's building. When the exhibits were reconfigured into the America on the Move exhibition, which featured the engine displayed as part of a diorama recreating its arrival in Santa Cruz, California in 1876. Today, it can be found here on display at the Smithsonian Museum of American History, where it is seen on display today. What you see right behind me is Capital Traction Company 303. Capital Traction Company 303 was built by the American Car Company in St. Louis, Missouri in 1898 and is a single truck trolley car. This car was one of 16 built for the Capital Traction Company. This car spent many years hauling people along the system in the national capital for many years. This car traveled over the 7th Street route and pulled open and closed trailers. Two events in the early 1900s changed the appearance of this car. An order of the District of Columbia Electric Railway Commission alerted the classic lines of the car by requiring enclosed platforms. Capital Transit Company installed portable vestibules to fulfill the requirements by 1905. In 1906, the Traction Company stopped letting the exterior of its cars for specific routes and renumbered its single truck cars and trailers. In the process, this car traded its yellow and cream paint for a simpler green and cream scheme and continued to serve on the 7th Street route. In 1912, the District of Columbia Public Utilities Commission issued an order requiring a conductor on each car. As a result, Capital Traction Company withdrew all single truck passenger equipment from service in late January 1913. The company sold a large number of these surplus cars in the next few years, but retained this car in storage. In 1933, it was renamed the Capital Transit, and the car also kept the number. During the arrival of the PCC cars in 1937, this car was brought into the spotlight as part of a parade to introduce the new cars to Washington, D.C. Coupled with Trailer 1512, this car operated briefly again on the streets of Washington in August that year. It then sat idle during the war years and was not used again until 1949. By then, Faye Johnson of Capital Transit had seen that a trolley pole was added to the roof of this car. For the time this car's 51-year life, motormen did not have to turn back at the plow pit. The car traveled all overhead lines in the city limits. However, the maintenance of way and car departments had a concern that a derailment on open track could damage the chilled iron wheels of the Lord Baltimore truck, so this car did not venture to distant Branchville and Cabin John on those suburban lines in Maryland. In 1956, it was renamed DC Transit and the car again kept the number. Then, in 1961, DC Transit continued to offset this car and Trailer 1512 for a fan trip service until it pulled a plow on a trip that year. Under the management of O'Roy Chalk, DC Transit retained ownership of that year after streetcar service ended in 1962. Then O'Roy Chalk dispatched the train to the company's main bus facility in Bladensburg, where the shop crew restored the car's exterior to its 1898 appearance, and he had the train and its motor installed to the boardroom on the main floor of the former car house on 36th and M Street, and it stayed there until being donated to the Smithsonian Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. in 1975. It was placed in storage till being put inside the building with statues placed on it as well. What you see right behind me is Chicago Transit Authority 6719. Chicago Transit Authority 6719 was built by the St. Louis Car Company in St. Louis, Missouri in 1959 and is a rapid transit car. This car was used on the Chicago Transit Authority's rail system in the city of Chicago, Illinois, many years ago. This car was also part of a married pair rapid transit set, which the car was paired with car 6720, and it appears that car was scrapped many years ago. Also, it was used to haul passengers around the city of Chicago from station to station for several years. Then, in 1992, the car was retired and was added to the collection of the Smithsonian Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. It was carefully being cosmetically restored before being placed on exhibit. In 2003, it was then moved into the building and it probably no longer has its trucks. Also, beside it looks like the Wabash and Madison CTA station in Chicago, and making it look like it's in its natural habitat. Also, you can even visit the interior of the car as well, and as you're visiting the interior of the car, it looks like it's traveling through the city as well, as you can see by the windows as well. What you see right behind me is Southern 1401. Southern 1401 was built by Alco in Richmond, Virginia in 1926 and is the 668-88 steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 462 Pacific type steam locomotive and is a PS4 class steam locomotive. The locomotive is also named Charlotte. This locomotive was used to haul passenger trains for many years and pulled train cars that match its liveries well. In 1942, when the locomotive hauled the Atlanta Special passenger train with its sister 1403, which was built by the same company and serial number being 66890, and was scrapped later on. And when this locomotive in 1403 double-headed the train between Atlanta, Georgia and Washington, D.C., the train crashed into a stalled truck at a railroad crossing in Norcross, Georgia, and both locomotives derailed, with the first four cars and 12 or 13 people were injured. Then the locomotives were repaired and then returned to service. In 1945, it was one of 8 of its class to pull President Franklin Roosevelt's funeral train from Atlanta, Georgia to Washington, D.C., and this locomotive led the funeral train along with Sister 1385, and that locomotive's serial number was 64862, and it was built in 1923 but by Alco in Schenectady, New York, and was later scrapped at the Baltimore Steel Company in Baltimore, Maryland. That locomotive double-headed with this locomotive from Greenville, South Carolina to Salisbury, North Carolina. In 1951, the locomotive's last heavy repairs were taking place. In 1952, the locomotive was then retired from service and pulled its last revenue run on the railroad's Danville division between Salisbury, North Carolina, and Monroe, Virginia. It was then donated to the Smithsonian Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., and as the donation was requested to the railroad's president, Harry A. DeButz, by a rail fan called Walter Thrall and a lawyer of Washington, D.C., W. Graham Clayton Jr. In 1953, it was moved to Alexandria, Virginia, and was stored at the Henry Street Yard and awaited the museum's decision. Then, in 1955, it was said that the museum made the acquisition of the locomotive and would display it in the present location. In 1961, it was then cosmetically restored and was then transported to the museum by flatbed truck to the site, which was under construction that time and opened 3 years later. In 1965, it was given a visor on its headlight. And by the way, the name Charlotte on the locomotive has something to do with a city in North Carolina. Also, Southern 1401 is the only remaining Southern 462 left in the world today and can be found here at the Smithsonian Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., where it is today. Well, I hope you all enjoyed learning about trains with me today in Matthew Lap Train Guy. Also, I hope to see you all again real soon. And if you didn't subscribe to my channel yet, the subscribe button is just down below the video screen. And if you didn't give the Facebook page a like yet, here's where you want to go. And if you didn't give the Instagram page a follow yet, here's where you want to go as well. Also, be sure to get your merch at teesprings.com. The link is in the description box below, along with the Facebook and Instagram pages. As always, remember to subscribe to the Train Guy. So this is Matthew Lap, host of Matthew Lap Train Guy, signing out until next time. All aboard!